Do you guys remember that Build the Wall GoFundMe campaign, the one that raised like $25 million? Well, it seems that Steve Bannon, former advisor to President Donald Trump, along with 3 others, have been charged for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering related to that GoFundMe. Let's talk about it. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Law-Splaining the Interwebs. I'm your host, Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. And I've got a short news update for you, and it's kind of a big one. Former Presidential Advisor Steve Bannon and 3 other people have been charged in connection with a GoFundMe account to build the wall. Do you guys remember this GoFundMe? It raised like $25 million, and purportedly all of the money raised would be used in some way to build the wall. But now federal prosecutors are saying that that is not what happened, and that actually the 4 people charged conspired to launder the money and commit wire fraud. Now, what does that actually mean? Laundering money means taking money for one purpose, one stated purpose, and utilizing it for another in an unlawful way. So, for example, saying that you're going to send all of the money to a nonprofit for the purposes of building the wall, and then actually taking a salary out of that and changing that from a tax-exempt sort of donation into a taxable set of income and stuff like that, that can be money laundering. It's converting money from one purpose into another. And wire fraud is inducing someone to give money by the means of interstate communications for a different purpose than what is stated. So in this case, the allegation would be that they were that people, hundreds of thousands of people, were induced to donate to this campaign for the purposes of building the wall, but the money was actually used for some other purpose. And they're really focusing explicitly on some statements in the GoFundMe campaign that stated that one of the defendants would receive not a single penny of compensation for the GoFundMe itself. And because of that, we should go ahead and take a look at the article. And it does actually link to the charging document, but I think the article does a pretty good job of summarizing the main issues that we don't have to sift through 23 pages of legal text. So here we go. Steve Bannon, We Build the Wall organizers arrested, charged with defrauding donors. Public statements that 100% of the money would be put toward the wall were false, prosecutors say. Steve Bannon, former advisor to President Trump, was among 4 suspects arrested Thursday and indicted in connection with an online fundraising campaign that allegedly defrauded donors of hundreds of thousands of dollars, the Justice Department announced. According to the indictment, Bannon and co-defendant Brian Kolfage told the public that they were a volunteer organization and that 100% of the money raised would go towards their stated goal, which was to raise money for the federal government to build a wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. This was a big news story back when it happened. The campaign went viral. Within just a couple hours, they had raised something like $17 million and went on to raise a total of around $25 million before the campaign came to an end or was shut down. So we've got those representations being false, the indictment said. Prosecutors claim that Kolfage, Bannon, Andrew Badolato, and Timothy Shea took money for themselves as the campaign raised upward of $25 million. The indictment alleges that Bannon received more than $1 million through a nonprofit that he then used for personal expenses and to pay Kolfage. And let me give you guys a little bit of legal advice. Don't create a nonprofit organization for the purposes of personal expenses. It is not actually what they're for, and if you do it and get caught, it will be very bad for you. Prosecutors say Bannon and the others used the nonprofit and a shell company to hide the payments to Kolfage by, quote, by using fake invoices and sham vendor arrangements, as well as other means of keeping the payments quiet. The indictment stated that in order to raise funds, Kolfage and Bannon, quote, repeatedly and falsely told the public that Kolfage would not take a penny in compensation. According to prosecutors, Kolfage instructed payments to be made out to his spouse, and this was reflected in a 1099 form the nonprofit used, saying the payment was for, quote, media. So we've got some issues going on here, and, there's some sort of trail that the prosecutors are attempting to follow with this. The campaign's website said that all the money raised would go to the government for building the wall, and that if they did not meet their fundraising target, they would, quote, refund every single penny, according to the indictment. Within a week of Kolfage launching the campaign in December of 2018, they raised roughly $17 million, prosecutors said. Due to concerns over where the money was going, the crowdfunding platform told Kolfage to identify a nonprofit that the money would go to, or the funds would be returned. And if you're not familiar with crowdfunding platforms and how they work, they have to have an identifiable recipient, because crowdfunding platforms are not banks. They act like banks in many ways, but they're not. They're not designed to hold funds longer than a specified period of time. They're not designed to allow transactional interchanges between multiple people, and they're not regulated as such. So while they may temporarily hold money inside the campaign itself, inside an account with the crowdfunding agent, or in some cases like GoFundMe, what they will do is they will actually very quickly shuffle the money to the intended recipient. However, when you set up a third-party GoFundMe, the recipient of the funds must consent to the receipt, because otherwise, I could say that I was setting up a GoFundMe for some blind mute kid in a different country to be brought to the US to go to college or something like that, and then I could just accept the money into some sort of account that was set up, and that would be potentially fraudulent. So to minimize that activity, they require some verification processes. They actually need consent of the person, they need identification, they need tax information, all of that stuff, so that they can properly categorize and catalog the money that comes in and the money that goes out. If you don't provide a recipient in a certain amount of time, then the money will actually kick back to the donors, and GoFundMe will cancel the campaign. So if you're doing this and saying that it's all going to a nonprofit, you have to eventually name a nonprofit. And it's typically within about 30 days of the campaign starting up, as seems to be the case of what they're saying here. So this is all standard procedure for GoFundMe. Fox doesn't really get into this aspect of creating a GoFundMe, but I have some personal knowledge in regards to this about creating a GoFundMe for someone else. The 30-day request to have the money go somewhere is part of their standard practice, and then the verification process that needs to take place for them to send the money involves sending things like, again, identification, banking information, proof of ownership or proof of authority for the person receiving the money. So if you set up a GoFundMe for someone else to receive money and then you try and take it for yourself, GoFundMe doesn't let you. So that seems to be what happened here. Let's see. So due to concerns over where the money was going, the crowdfunding platform told Kolfage to identify a nonprofit that the money would go to, or the funds would be returned. I don't actually think that's due to concerns over where the money was going. That's, like I said, that's just part of their process. At that point, prosecutors said Bannon and Battolato worked on creating the nonprofit We Build the Wall, Inc. The stated goal was then changed to using the money to privately construct the wall, and past donors had to agree to have their money used for that purposes. They were assured that all of the money would go to wall construction and not to Kolfage or the organization's board, the indictment said. When Kolfage, Bannon, and Battolato learned in the fall of 2019 that the endeavor was under federal investigation, they allegedly, quote, took additional steps to conceal the fraudulent scheme, the indictment said. This allegedly included using encrypted messaging applications, putting a stop to Kolfage's salary payments, and removing text from the website saying Kolfage would not be compensated, while adding a notification that he would begin collecting a salary in January 2020. Those sorts of retroactive changes, again, not legally advisable, not a good thing, and they point towards some indicia of guilt. So this is not where you want to be as an accused. As alleged, the defendants defrauded hundreds of thousands of donors, capitalizing on their interest in funding a border wall to raise millions of dollars under the false pretense that all of the money would be spent on construction, acting U.S. Attorney Audrey Strauss said in a statement. While repeatedly assuring donors that Brian Kolfage, the founder and public face of We Build the Wall, would not be paid a cent, the defenders secretly schemed to pass hundreds of thousands of dollars to Kolfage, which he used to fund his lavish lifestyle. Bannon and the other defendants were each charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Each count carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. That's about the end of the important information there. You don't want to look like this in general, and you certainly don't want to look like this going to prison. Now, will he be going to prison? Will they be going to prison? It's hard to say at this point, of course. We just have an indictment, and an indictment is the government's accusation, and it is written most favorably towards the government prosecution's case. So right now we have one side of the story. The defense will have the option to raise all sorts of questions related to this, including the sufficiency of the evidence generated for the charges, the sufficiency of any wiretapping or surveillance or any other searches or seizures that were done by the government, and anything else under the sun. There are lots of different things that come before they even have to raise a defense to the charges at all. They will have the opportunity to challenge the sufficiency of the government's accusation. And until we see that, we won't really have any sort of idea about the merits of the case or the strength of both parties. But right now, you've got a federal government investigating $25 million of money donated freely by the public through interstate commerce, which is what makes this a federal matter, by using the internet, by inducing people to donate through the internet, and then by accepting the money from all different states and distributing it out. We've got a federal issue, and you do not want to have federal wire fraud or money laundering charges brought against you ever, because the teams that work on them tend to be very thorough and very sophisticated, and the charges are very difficult to fight when they put forth a competent case. Usually, especially in the age where you have a middleman like GoFundMe, you're going to have the government with access to all of the, presumably, I should say, with access to the entire history of the campaign, all of the communications between all of the parties. In fact, it's likely that these gentlemen had communications with a particular staff person at GoFundMe, and those are all going to be logged. And it does say that the government suggests that they were using encrypted messaging services, which in and of itself is just fine. Using encrypted messaging services doesn't mean anything. You're welcome to do it. There's an app on the App Store called Signal that I suggest everybody check out. That being said, if they have any indication of what might have been in those encrypted messages and how they would have that would be an interesting question. If that were the case, we may see a stronger case being put together for the government. But at this point, I can tell you with confidence, I wouldn't want to be any of those guys. And if they had asked me what to do, I would have said, hey, how about not stealing money? That would have been my main advice. It's pretty simple. But we'll see and watch how this develops. We'll see if Bannon will be able to slide out of this one, or if he will end up with some serious charges. And if he does, we will have to watch whether Trump is in office long enough to consider a pardon, which I hope, if they're guilty, he would not do that, but we'll have to see what's going on. I take particular offense to people who lie about taking money for a particular purpose and then use it on themselves. That seems to be a little bit dishonest, and I'm not a fan of it. So, all right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Hope you found this news to be interesting and informative. If you did, go ahead, hit like, subscribe, share, all of that stuff, and we will see you next time. Peace. Peace.